Well, good morning. Welcome to New Life. We are in the middle of a very long series of messages called The Jesus Project. We are, I don't know, a year plus into a 3-year project for us, which is an opportunity for us as best as we can to expose ourselves to everything that Jesus said and did as we have it recorded in the 4 Gospels. And it's sort of an ambitious project. I admit that. I appreciate those of you who have gone for the ride with me for the whole, the whole way so far. Appreciate those of you who are going to stick with us through to the end of this. But our goal and our mission with this has simply been to ask this, are there things that we have learned about Jesus that we might need to unlearn? Are there ways that we have grown to understand Jesus that are not really accurate and not really, consistent with who he actually is and who we saw him presented in the Gospels as? And if we could get rid of some of those ideas, and maybe we could let some of those things go, it might actually help us to follow him better. And at the end of the day, my hope and my goal and the whole reason that we're doing this is because I want you and I to be better followers of Jesus. Because I think that if you and I are better followers of Jesus, we are better equipped to live in the world that Jesus has invited us into. We're better equipped as husbands and wives and parents and co-workers and friends and all of that sort of stuff that flows out of this one central thing, which is if we could get our hands around what it looks like to follow Jesus better, I think, it's just my conviction, I think it would make your life better. And I think it would make the lives of people around you better. And that doesn't sound like a terrible way to spend a life, does it? All right, that's the housekeeping piece. That's why we're doing this. I don't know, and you guys know I'm a creature of habit. This table was like 6 inches away from where it's supposed to be, and it was no, it wasn't your fault. I put it there. It was not the youth group's fault. I took it off the stage. I put it here last night, and then I was standing in front of it, and I was like, this is not where it's supposed to be. So, all right, now I'm better now. I was having a little, just so you know, I was having like a little OCD moment that was happening right there as all that stuff was happening as I was saying all of those things. Most of you guys know, outside of my life here at the church as a pastor, which I've been doing for a long time, over the last 11 or 12 years, my other I call this my other church community, is my CrossFit community. I started working out at a gym in town about 11, maybe 12 years ago almost. And then about 7 years ago, I started coaching. And then 4 years ago, which seems like it's hard for me to believe, but 4 years ago, I started owning and coaching at the gym that is, again, part of my second community. One of the things that I found is that I love the act of coaching. I think of it by nature, that's just part of who I am. I enjoy watching people get better at things. And so inside of this context, it obviously expresses itself in, hey, let's get better at trying to follow Jesus. But inside the gym context, it expresses itself as, let's get better at the things that we're trying to work on. Let's become more physically fit human beings who are a little bit more difficult to kill every single day and who have an opportunity, right, like to live a little bit longer and to live maybe a little bit better quality of life if we spend the time now, the suffering now, in making ourselves a little bit better inside of that context. Now, what I've found is that as a coach, I tend to enjoy certain things, coaching certain things, and there are other things that I don't like coaching. And they tend to correlate to things that I like doing and not doing. So when it comes to working out, I do not like running. I don't like anything that involves me moving my body weight through space because I tend to carry a little too much of my body weight with me at all times. And so I prefer things that involve lifting a heavy weight because I carry a little bit of my extra weight with me. It gives me a slight mechanical advantage in carrying some of that weight around. There are things that I enjoy coaching because I tend to enjoy watching them happen. I enjoy watching complex things sometimes get broken down into a kind of piece by piece way that can help someone get better. One of the things that we do at CrossFit, and this is not a CrossFit advertisement, although if you ever want to talk to me, just come see me. But one of the things that we do at CrossFit is we do Olympic lifting. We do clean and jerks, and we do snatches. So if you ever watch weightlifting in an Olympic environment, you're watching people do clean and jerks and snatches. They're taking very, very heavy weights, and they're moving them off the floor all the way overhead. When you watch someone who does that really well, and then you count the amount of pounds on their barbell, you would be absolutely amazed that a human being of any size can move the amounts of weight that they take off of the floor and they put over their heads. It is ridiculous. In other words, guys, all of those ladies who do that would put you to shame. Like 1,000%. And so I enjoy, this is one of the things I enjoy coaching at the gym, because I love watching people move this way, and I love taking someone who doesn't really know what they're doing with a lift like that that's incredibly complex, very technical, involves a lot of moving pieces, and I try to help them, just get a little bit better. And when I watch people, I'm always watching, at least as a coach, I'm watching for flaws. I'm watching for, hey, what can be done better inside of that movement? How can I correct? How can I help that person do a little bit better with the thing that they're trying to do? Because for them, it's challenging. And some people, and this is just, some people are just a train wreck. I don't know how else to explain it. There are some people, and I'm just like, I love you, but I do not know what that is. That is not what that's supposed to look like. And then, as a coach, you're trying to help them make it look better. My goal is by the end of that hour, we just make it look a little bit better. And some people, no matter how long they've done it, it seems like you can still see them sort of working through the pieces. And then there are other people who it's just like you give them a barbell and they move like it's the most natural, normal thing that they have ever done in their lives. I'm like, how does that happen? We have a girl at the gym. Her name is Lisa. I told her I got permission that I could use her as an example. I called her this week. I was texting back and forth, and I said, I'm going to just describe you as weightlifting Jesus today. Because when I watch her move in a class, in barbell movements, it is like this is exactly what it's supposed to look like. I try as a coach, I'm always trying, what's the flaw? How can I make this a little bit better? And I stand there and I do my coach lean and I do this is, coach lean. And I watch and I'm like, looks pretty perfect. Good job, Lisa. Looks great. It's a really remarkable thing to watch someone do something really complex, really technical, that's really difficult to do, and move a lot of weight while she is doing it, and just stand there and just sort of admire it. Like, that's exactly how it is supposed to be done. And that, I think, to some extent or another, is what the gospel writers are doing when they give us the picture of Jesus' life. They are saying, this is incredibly technical, it is incredibly complex. The things that Jesus is doing and saying and the way that he is interacting with the human beings on this planet is really difficult. Like, all of us can understand, it is really difficult to live a good human life. Can we all agree on that? It's really hard to do. There are people involved that make it so much more difficult to do, right? There are circumstances that are involved that make it so much more difficult for us to live just a good human life. And then the gospel writers are presenting us a picture and an image of Jesus, and they're saying Jesus isn't just living a good life. He's not just living a pretty good life. He is living the best life that has ever been lived on the planet. And what they're trying to do is to say, if you were to watch and you were to see someone interact with other human beings, you would see this is exactly how it is supposed to be done. If you were a coach trying to coach it up, you would have to stand there and say, that's pretty good. Looks pretty perfect. Looks pretty much exactly like the way it was supposed to look. And so the gospel writers are presenting this image of Jesus, and we have talked about this over the last couple of months or so, as the living intersection of heaven and earth, as the place where heaven and earth perfectly and uniquely come together. And as the gospel writers present this image of Jesus, they are inviting us to see what those first people heard and saw, and to have the same sort of response that the first people had when they watched Jesus walk through this life, this world that is incredibly difficult to navigate, incredibly complex, is filled with all of the same stuff that your life and my life is filled with, and yet seems to move through it with such grace and with such compassion and with such beauty that we can't find anything quite like it to compare it to, because as the living intersection of heaven and earth, he's there representing, this is the way the life is supposed to be lived. And the first gospel writers recognized it. And the crowds of people that watched Jesus live and move and interact recognized it. And this morning we're going to talk about this idea that if we could see what they saw, if we could put ourselves back in those moments, that we might have that same sort of response. It just stands back and is in awe of how good and beautiful and true the life is that he was living. We left off last week with Jesus interacting with the Pharisees around this idea of what was clean and what was unclean, whether the things that came out of you made you unclean or whether it was the food that you ate and whether you washed your hands and said all the prayers and all that sort of stuff. And then this morning what we're going to see is essentially Jesus giving us a little bit of an acted out parable about what's clean and what's unclean, because the Pharisees and the religious leaders didn't just define cups and plates and bowls and hands as clean and unclean. They also separated the world out into groups of people who were clean and unclean, who were good and who were not good, who were part of God's mission and part of God's kingdom, and who were not part of God's mission and not part of God's kingdom. And one of the things that we find is that Jesus, just like he did with the clean hands and the clean cups and the clean bowls, does not regard these distinctions that they are making between what's good and what's bad, who's right and who's wrong. Instead, Jesus seems bent on crossing all of these lines and inviting all kinds of people into relationship with himself. And so that's what we're going to see this morning, sort of an acted out parable on that teaching from last week. From there, Jesus arose and went away to the region of Tyre and Sidon, which we don't know where it is, but I'll give you some context in a minute. And he entered a house and did not want anyone to know, yet he could not be hidden. But immediately a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit heard of him and came and fell down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile, a Syro-Phoenician by birth, and she begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. Jesus leaves sort of the Galilee region, which is in the northern part of Israel, and this is the first time in all of the Gospels that we see Jesus going to an entirely Gentile or entirely non-Jewish region of the world. And essentially, I think what's happening here, if you were to carry this back a couple of weeks, you remember that Jesus was trying to get away into the wilderness. The crowds followed him out into the wilderness. He feeds the 5,000. He tries to get a moment of peace from the crowds. He gets back to the other side of the sea, and the crowds follow him there, and then he has to have a long conversation with them there. And then the Pharisees and the religious leaders come, and they want to have a long conversation with him. I think Jesus is just looking for a little vacation. Honestly, this is my simple take on Jesus in this moment. I just need to go somewhere where no one knows who I am, where no one knows what my reputation is, no one knows my story. I just want to get some time away from all of these people. And again, he loves all the people, but all of these people, just like introverts, love all the people, but every once in a while, I just need some space. It's like, I just need to go away. Goes away to the region of Tyre and Sidon, which would be in modern-day Lebanon, but would at the time have been a Roman province of Syria. And so this woman who comes to him is not a Jewish woman. Mark's trying to make sure that we understand that her entire heritage, her entire cultural background, her religious background, all of that sort of stuff, she does not know anything about Moses, the law, the Jewish customs, the Jewish religion, Jewish faith. She doesn't know anything about any of that stuff. All she knows is that she has heard about Jesus. And even here in this region where Jesus is trying to escape from, get away from, push away from all of these other people, she knows who he is, finds him in the house that he's in with his disciples, comes to him and begs him to have compassion on her, a Gentile woman outside of Israel, outside of Jewish customs, faith, religion, background, all of that sort of stuff. Comes to him and does the same thing that everyone so far who has been in need of Jesus meeting them does. She just asks for help. She cries out, "If you could you take care of my child?" And the interesting thing is that Jesus sees all people as real people. And this is incredibly important for us because I think at some point or another you may have gotten the impression that Jesus and the people who follow Jesus don't see all people as real people. It's possible that you maybe have run into some people who have made you believe that Jesus and people who follow him don't see all people as real people, that we see some people as less than, and some people as other than, and some people as different, and some people as excluded, and some people as pushed away, and there's all sorts of different ways that we can define that, right? But Jesus sees all people, regardless of their background, regardless of their culture, regardless of their race, where they're coming from, what they know about him, what they don't know about him, what they know about the Old Testament, and what they don't know about it. He just sees people. And the woman comes to him and says, "See me as a person." And he said to her, and this one's going to bother us. I should have told you that. He said to her, "Let the children be fed first. For it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." Now, does that bother anyone? It's okay. I'm going to take an informal poll. But does that statement sort of sit right with all of us? Is there a piece of us that's like, Jesus, if you see all people as real people, if this woman is coming to you because she's in need, it's sort of insulting for you to say this. It's sort of not what we would expect Jesus to say, right? Because if you were writing the gospel story and I was writing the gospel story, and we've been writing this story about this Jesus person who's going around everywhere that he goes, sees all people as real people, has compassion on all of these sorts of people, then what we would imagine Jesus would say, and again, this is where we always fall into the trap. We think we know exactly what Jesus would say and do. What we would imagine Jesus would say is, "Absolutely. Let me take care of your little daughter. Let me provide what you need. Let me show my grace and my mercy and my compassion to this person who is a real person." Instead, Jesus says, we're going to feed the kids at the table first, and we're not going to take what's given to the kids and give it to the dogs. And the context, right, is that for a Jewish person who would identify themselves as a righteous and religious and good Jewish person, they might look at Gentiles, people who were non-Jewish, and call them dogs. Unworthy, unfit, not in relationship with God, not the kinds of people that God was supposed to be rescuing, that God was supposed to be redeeming. And yet, here's Jesus, sort of what we can, at least on the surface, we can sort of get into this and feel like, why is he playing into that stereotype? Why is he sort of feeding into this? Am I the only one who asks that question, who reads that and thinks, I don't know, Jesus, that doesn't really feel like the kind of thing that you should say, right? And so, Jesus is trying to express this really difficult and really complex point, which is that his reason for showing up was first, and that's why he makes it a point, it was first to take care of the people that God had lived in relationship with for all of those years. His primary purpose, and this is important for us to get, Jesus' primary purpose for the time that he was there was the people of Israel. He says it at different moments throughout the Gospels. He says, "My reason for being here is to show compassion to the lost sheep of Israel." And think about this. Jesus has a limited window of time. I don't know if he knew exactly how long it was, but he probably had a good idea it wasn't going to be long. And Jesus understands that as he is doing the thing that he is called to do, he is feeding bread to the children. And again, you should hear some of the echoes from the feeding of the 5,000. He's kind of drawing all of that stuff into this little story here. As he is feeding the bread to the children of God, the people of God, he is causing such distress. He is causing such consternation among those religious leaders that he can, I think, even in this moment, feel the window of time compressing and feels like I have to finish the thing that I was called to do. And so if I am feeding my family, and we all understand this, if I'm feeding my family, I'm going to feed my family first. That's the first priority of your life. I have a huge dog at home. I still would not think, and you would not think, of taking the food for your kids and giving it to your pet first. And for Jesus, it's not about whether or not the person gets fed. It's about when things happen. His primary purpose for the time is the people of Israel. And so his mission was concerned with them. He's withdrawing to this Gentile region, hoping to get a little bit of time and hoping to get a little bit of space. And even there he finds that he can't get the time and the space that he's looking for. But he recognized the short window in which he was working. He recognizes how compressed it's getting as the religious leaders start to circle in around him and press in on him, and feels the weight of what he was called to do in this moment and in this time. But she answered him, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." And he said to her, "For this statement, you may go your way. The demon has left your daughter." And she went home and found the child lying in bed, and the demon had gone. It's a really bold and sort of witty response that the woman makes to Jesus, isn't it? Yes, Lord, I understand, and you understand, and we understand that your primary purpose is to serve bread to the children. But what I am asking for is not a loaf of bread that belongs to the children. What I'm asking for is simply crumbs that fall off the table while the children are eating. What I'm asking for doesn't require you to give up the thing that you are doing. It doesn't require you to give up your mission to serve bread to the people of God, to the children of God, to that promised group of people, Abraham's descendants, that all of those good things had been said about for all of those years. She says it doesn't require you to stop doing that. In fact, all it requires is for some of the crumbs that are falling off the table, that are being let go, to be consumed by someone else that everyone else might look at and think is not worthy. Everyone else might look at and think doesn't belong. Everyone else might look at and think, well, she's not the right kind of person. But you recognize, Jesus, that a crumb, a single crumb, if it were, of your mercy and your grace and your compassion is all that is required for my daughter to be well. I don't need you to stop doing what you're doing. I don't need you to give up the mission to the people of Israel to come to people like us. All I'm asking is for a little bit of mercy. All I'm asking for is a little bit of grace. And she finds it. And then he returned from the region of Tyre and went through Sidon to the Sea of Galilee in the region of the Decapolis. And they brought to him a man who was deaf and had a speech impediment. And they begged him to lay his hand on him. And as he leaves the Gentile region, he goes back down, travels down through the northern part of Israel, goes back into the region of the Sea of Galilee, his sort of home region, goes back over across the sea into a region called the Decapolis, which you may or may not remember, but was where the guy who had the legion of demons had all of the demons cast out of him. That was in the region of the Decapolis, a mixed area where there are Jewish people and Gentile people. And we don't know what kind of a person it was that they brought to Jesus. They don't say. Mark doesn't say it was a Gentile guy. It doesn't say it was a Jewish guy. It just says they brought him a man who had a need. And they presented him to Jesus, and they did the same thing that everyone else has done who needs Jesus. They just begged him to help. Could you help me, help this man in this moment? And taking him aside from the crowd privately, he put his fingers into his ears, and after spitting, touched his tongue. Don't worry about the germs. Don't think about it. And looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, Ephphatha, that is, be opened. And his ears were opened, and his tongue was released, and he spoke plainly, and Jesus charged them to tell no one. But the more he charged them, the more zealously they proclaimed it. And they were astonished beyond measure, saying, he has done all things well. He even makes the deaf hear and the mute to speak. And in these two little stories that Mark kind of puts right next to each other, two stories, two people who come to Jesus begging for mercy, begging for help, begging for just a little crumb of God's mercy and compassion to be extended to them. The response that people have when they see what Jesus does to the Gentiles and to the people who are mixed and to the people who are the right kinds of people, to all of the kinds of people. When they watch what Jesus does, when they see what Jesus does, when they hear the things that Jesus says, their response is, he has done all things well. They stand back in awe and wonder at who Jesus is, what he's done, how he's moving his way through this life that is incredibly difficult to live. How he's doing these things that to them and to us are absolutely extraordinary. These are not everyday occurrences. These are not things that you kind of, I've seen that 1,000 times before. These are not things that are expected and anticipated. These are the kinds of things that caused people to wonder about who he was and to wonder about what it would mean that Jesus would show up in this moment doing the kinds of things that he did. He has done all things well. He makes even the deaf to hear and the mute to speak. And they're pulling on this one prophecy from Isaiah chapter 35. It says it this way, that when the time of the Messiah comes, I'm just kind of shorthanding the beginning of that passage. When that time comes, then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, the ears of the deaf will be unstopped. Then shall the lame man leap like a deer, and the tongue of the mute will sing for joy and say, in essence, he has done all things well. This is one of the things that we can sort of rest our trust, our hope, and our confidence in. This is one of the things that when we watch Jesus in the Gospels, as we see the things he does and hear the things that he says, they are reminding us that God does all things well. God does all things for all kinds of people, and he does all of those things really well. He takes everything that's broken, he takes everything that's fractured, our deafness, our blindness, our dumbness, our inability to speak, our inability to live that life that we were created and that we were meant to live. He does all of those things well. He restores earth back to its intended purpose. Everywhere that Jesus goes, he does those things that are absolutely extraordinary, absolutely unbelievable, because as the living intersection of heaven and earth, he's inviting the people in those places back into a healed and restored and well relationship with their Heavenly Father. He does all things well. He does everything for you, for me, for people like you and unlike you, for people that you love and for people that you can't stand. And you think he shouldn't do well for them. And he does it anyway. One of the things that I think this story and the way the gospel writers are presenting it to us is meant for us to do is to remind you that this is true. God does all things well. And some of you are sitting here this morning, and when you look around at the circumstances and situations of your life, you are reminded that that's true. Some of you, when you look around at your relationships and you look around at the place you live and the way your life is going and the circumstances of your life, it looks to you on the surface like everything is being done well. And you can point to moments, and I can point to moments in my life, and you can probably, again, point to moments in yours where you could say, God was doing something there, and what he was doing was really, really good. And so there's an invitation inside of these stories and inside of the response of the people inside this story for us to remind ourselves that God does all of those things well. It's a reminder for us to give thanks. It's a reminder for us to praise God, to say thank you for doing all of those things so well in my life, for taking me, and I was broken and all the stuff that I was experiencing, and healing and restoring and giving me joy and giving me life and all of the things that you can point to in your life that are those good things. To remind you, God does all things well. And it serves as a reminder that when you forget this, it is no less true. When you forget and I forget, because you will inevitably forget and I will inevitably forget, that God does all things well. Because you will find yourself, and maybe you sit here this morning and you say, not will I find myself someday, but I find myself currently in a moment where I doubt whether or not this is true. Where it does not feel, does not appear, does not from the surface of my life look like God does all things well. In fact, what it looks like is God has made a mistake. I know you're not supposed to say that in church. I know a pastor, I'm not supposed to say that. But have you ever thought maybe he messed up? Have you ever thought, maybe I'm the only one, why did it go this way? Why is it currently going this way? It's a reminder and it's an invitation to us that inside of that place, when we don't feel like things are working out for our good and where it does not feel like God is doing all things well, that it is on us sometimes to just go and ask. The Syrophoenician woman, she's a Gentile, she has no idea. She doesn't know anything about Old Testament. She doesn't know Moses, doesn't know the law, doesn't know the covenant, doesn't know any of that sort of stuff. You know what she knows? All things are not well. And I would like all things to be made well. A person who's deaf and dumb and mute, can't speak. If you'd ask him, is everything good in your life? I think he would probably have told you no. Everything's not good. I mean, there's a whole lot of good things, but there's just one really difficult thing that I am struggling with. And they bring him to Jesus and he begs, would you make me well? If you're sitting here this morning and you find yourself in the middle of one of those places, and you feel like it's blasphemous to admit it, and you feel like it's not, I'm supposed to have enough faith, and I'm supposed to have enough trust, and I'm supposed to be this great follower of Jesus, and I'm supposed to have all of this stuff figured out, I think that something that we see inside of these stories today is this: it's okay to just make this your prayer. Would you make me well? Would you take those pieces inside of me that feel all messed up and all broken and all jumbled around? And would you sort through all of that and make me well? And notice what it doesn't say. Would you make everything in my life go well? That's not the point. Would you make me well? Even in the middle of this difficult spot, would you make me well? Would you pray with me this morning? Jesus, we recognize that things in this life and our world are not always the way they are supposed to be. Things, because of our sin and our brokenness, and because of the sin and brokenness of others around us, get all misplaced, displaced, broken, fractured, pushed out of joint and out of the way they are meant to be. And we feel it. And some of us are feeling it right now in this moment, just how broken it feels. So Jesus, with every last bit of faith and courage and confidence that we can muster, we just pray today, would you make me well? Not sort through everything, not make everything better, not fix all of it, but in the middle of it, would you make us well? Would you restore heaven to earth here in this place, in our hearts and our souls? Would you invite us back? Would you make us well? We can't do that for ourselves, and we admit, confess that out loud. But you can, and you do. Jesus, would you make all things well? In your name that we pray. Amen.